My name's Dingwall. I'm an educational developer at the Center for Teaching and Learning, and with me today is Rishi. He's part of our blended learning support team and is helping out with the demonstration of the technology today. The session today, we're going to talk a little bit about using reflection in your teaching practice, but specifically with the use of video. So this weird doohickey over here is kind of what we're demoing. It's called the swivel, and it's going to help us through some of these elements of reflecting on our teaching. There's no advancer, so I'm just going to go click, and my slide should advance. I didn't know there was so much power in one hand. That's just fantastic. I'm hoping that by the end of this 20-minute short session and then 10 minutes for questioning, that we'll be able to describe reflective practice in teaching. We'll discuss a few different means of reflecting on our teaching and identify a few of the different tools that we can use to reflect. Reflection in teaching, there's been many different definitions over time, and we can start in the 1930s with John Dewey stating that it's active, persistent, and careful consideration. If we look a little bit further into the future, thinking about our educational matters, making rational choices, and assuming responsibility for those choices. Framing, analyzing, and acting purposefully. And finally, we can stand outside of ourselves and come to a clearer understanding of what we do and who we are by freeing ourselves of distorted ways of reasoning and acting. So through all of this time, some of the key factors are being able to make rational decisions or have some way of connecting the dots in what we do and what we're intending to do. And there are different tools that we can use to reflect in our teaching. So we can write a journal, and this is something that I was asked to do when I was in teacher training, is before a lesson, I had an idea of what it was I wanted to achieve. And so I could ask myself the questions, did the students understand? What perceived difficulty did they have with the lesson? What actually happened? If I tried an activity, did that activity work? And so I would have some of that written out beforehand. I would teach my lesson, and following that, I would reflect on it. And I'm heavily relying on memory when it comes to the journal. And I'm relying on my own perception in the moment. So even right now, I'm thinking it's like I'm trying to balance knowing what's on the screen, what I'm actually saying, looking at the faces of everyone in the crowd. So there are a lot of different things that are happening, and right afterwards is the best time for me to write and reflect on that to try and capture all of it. But because there's so many different things going on in my mind, I may have a slightly distorted view of that. I've often come away from lessons thinking, oh, that went terribly, but thankfully my cooperating teacher when I was on internship said, that definitely was not as bad as you just described it was. And then we would have that conversation. You can use student feedback as a means of reflection. So some of these might take form as a classroom assessment technique, like a minute paper. So at the end of a section of the class or at the end of the class, you're getting them to say, just for 1 minute, write down what the most important thing or the most surprising thing that you learned today. Or the muddiest point, like what is one question that you thought I would answer today that I didn't really answer? And when all of those come in, then you can again compare that to what I had intended for the lesson and what the students are then saying about the lesson. So if my goal was I really want them to understand how to isolate X when, they're looking at an equation that has only pluses and minuses. Did they actually get that, or are there still some students that have some questions? And I'm able to then reflect on that and change my practice. You can also do midpoint surveys for your course. So if you are 3 or 4 weeks into the term, you can actually use a survey to say what's going well and I should keep doing, what's not going well and I should maybe stop, Or what's something that I'm not currently doing that I should start doing? So that's one more means of a tool that I can use to reflect on my teaching. You can do peer observation. So maybe there's somebody in your department, a colleague that you would like to invite into your room as that second set of eyes. Like I mentioned with my cooperating teacher when I was on internship for teaching, there's somebody else in the room that is an expert in the area, knows the lesson ahead of time, and can come in and provide some of that feedback to you. So they can come in, maybe before the class you talk a little bit about what you're trying to do in that lesson, they observe, and then you talk about it a bit after. And thankfully in the case of my cooperating teacher it was, JR, that wasn't as bad as you just said it was. There are some things that you can try here. Have you considered X, Y, Z? I've seen this done. They can provide you different strategies. But it's again having that set of eyes that's outside of yourself, because when you're in the moment, there's just so many other things going on. And so the title of the session was How Video Can Be Used to Help You Reflect. And I talked a little bit about all of these different forms that are based on paper, based on internal reflection, or based on another human being coming into your room. And it's like, video itself is not the method, but it can help you with any of those other things. So if I'm thinking about reflection tasks I'm going to write in my journal, video can be some of that evidence that you actually go and you are that second set of eyes. You can sit down and I could watch the recording coming off of the swivel and say, as I watch myself, what parts of this lesson do I feel went well and matched with what my intentions were? Or you start to pick up on some nuances that you didn't necessarily know or habits that you have. So if you're like a real hand talker, but you don't really notice it, you're going to see that in the video. If I really scrunch up my face all the time and I just look mad while I'm teaching, I'm going to see that in my video. And so you'll start to pick up on some of those things. How you're phrasing things. If you're asking students questions, how much time are you actually waiting? So if I say, Jim, what's like 32 times 20? And if I just jump in and answer right away, then I'm not giving him enough time, or maybe I realize that I just ambushed him because he happens to be sitting here. Some of the guided reflections. So these are some of those activities where you're looking at the student surveys or keeping that learning log again as well. But the one I want to jump down to is individual versus collaborative. So if your colleague cannot actually come into the room, maybe there's a scheduling conflict or just something happened and they can't come in that day, then you still have something that you could review with them. So you could do it individually, as I said with the journal, or you can still use this tool collaboratively with a colleague, and you can go through it and say, what do you see? This is how I feel the lesson went, and this is, why, and then they can also provide their input. All of these things are internal. This is, it's not an intention of that I'm going to be publicizing this and like showing an entire department or showing the university my teaching, but it's a reflective tool for my own interest and personal development. We, through CTL, offer a peer mentoring program with Carla Peck, who couldn't be here today, but it could be something that's used in that program as well. So if you come together as a group, you may actually just show snippets of your teaching. So something new that you're trying that you would like some feedback on, or as a starting place to go on. There are a couple of things we need to keep in mind when we're lecturing. So there should be a note on the front door that this session is being recorded, and any of the pieces of this video that would be that may have accidentally captured somebody in this room, and of course I should have said this up front, was those images will be removed. If you ask questions and that happens to be recorded through the microphone that's attached to my neck, then that will also be removed. If you're going to do this in a room with students, then you can set up the swivel in such a way that you don't capture the students. If you're trying to do a more active activity, so if we were in small clusters and I would come out into the group, this lanyard, lapel, actually helps the swivel track me, so as I pace back and forth, it will move with me. So if I come into a small group, of course the student faces then will be captured. So there are some university regulations that should be on that ipo.ualberta.ca, there it is, that will give you some guidance and forms that you can use for that. So anytime we're capturing lectures, those are some of the things we might want to make sure we're aware of. A large part of it is making sure your students are aware that the session will be recorded. Very lastly, it could be used just as a way for lecture capture. If I am writing on the board and I want to capture that lesson for use in e-class later on, again, as long as it's contained within the course and student faces aren't present without them signing special forms, then we can use the swivel for that as well.